Chapter 8, Our Lady of Perpetual Reflection. The rides are different for everyone. I'm convinced of that now. I mean, sure, there are some we ride together. Either we find ourselves drawn to some common experience, or maybe we're pulled in by the people we care about. Our friends, our families can drag us onto coasters and tilt-a-whirls that are really meant for them. But in the end, no matter whose ride we find ourselves on, the experience is all our own. Out of the blackness of the pit I had leaped into came a flash of green. I hit ground suddenly, a bruising belly flop on hard-packed earth. In the outside world, I would have been killed, but here, there were other things to kill you besides the drop. Here, it only stung for a few moments. With the wind knocked out of me, I took a few seconds to catch my breath before sitting up to take in my surroundings. I was on a wasteland, a cracked, blistered, salt flat, void of life. Bleak desolation spread out in all directions, like a place God had leveled for construction and then abandoned. The sky was flat pea green and made my skin look pallid and sickly. Only one structure stood on the endless salt flat. It was a mile or so ahead, shimmering like a mirage in the misty air. I ran toward it, not wanting to waste any more of my precious time. According to my watch, it was already 3:30 in real time. That gave me only 2.5 hours to make it through 4 more rides. As I neared the structure in the distance, I could see others like myself running toward the building from all directions. More riders gathering for their next ride. One of them bumped past me as if I weren't even there. He was in a trance. They were all like that. To these riders, the space between rides was just mental airspace, devoid of anything but the will to move through the next turnstile. I was different. Yes, I could feel the gravity of the ride pulling me toward it, but it didn't capture me the way it captured the others. Why not? I wondered. What was it about me that made me able to resist? What was it about me that made Cassandra see me as a worthy adversary? The building dissolved out of the mist. It was a cathedral, Notre Dame, to be exact. I knew from my poster of France. I recognized its 2 great spears on either side of a circular stained glass window. Only in this Notre Dame, the stained glass window was all red and leered like a single cyclops eye. As for the stonework of the cathedral, it wasn't stone at all. It was reflective glass. A hall of mirrors. Others kept pushing past me, the ride symbols on the backs of their hands glowing as they approached the turnstile. A mirror maze, I thought. How bad could it be? Then I laughed at the stupidity of my own question. Trapped in a maze of mirrors for eternity, shredded by bits of broken glass? Yeah, it could be pretty bad. I wondered if Quinn had passed this way or if his path had taken him to another ride. Regardless, the only way now was forward through the glass doors of the crystalline Notre Dame Cathedral, so I ran my hand over the scanner and pushed myself through the turnstile, into the maze of mirrors. I once got lost in the mall when I was really little. It was before I could read, before I knew left from right, and my mother's hand was the only thing that kept me safe from the big, bad world. When you're scared like that, all the stores and all the turns begin to look the same. You truly believe in the pit of your little kid mind that you're never going to be found. That's exactly how it felt to face the maze of mirrors. The halls were narrow, the turns unpredictable, and the dead ends demoralizing. I kept winding my way down past, swearing I could see the reflection of an exit, only to have to turn around and try again. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the clowns. I don't even know if everyone knew them as clowns, but I sure did. Big, floppy feet, a rim of ridiculous red hair, and battle camouflage. These were commando clowns. It was a reoccurring nightmare I'd have ever since I was little. Don't ask. But even worse than in my dreams, these clowns were all armed with heavy artillery, and then fired huge mortar shells down the narrow glass corridors from bazookas on their shoulders. Those shells never shattered the glass. Instead, they rebounded off, reflected the light, ricocheting in all directions until some poor slop got in the way and was blown to kingdom come. Never once did a mirror break from the explosions. I crawled and rolled to keep out of their sight and out of the killing path of their weapons. Bones littered the ground of this awful place, crunching beneath me as I crawled. They were dry and blanched like bones left under a hot desert sun. These were the kinds of bones you always saw on the ground in bad westerns, before the wagon train got attacked by Indians or the settlers had to start eating one another to stay alive. The thing was, These bones in the maze didn't resemble anything I knew about. It wasn't so much their size as their shape that was grotesque. I shuddered in to think what kind of monsters might lie deeper in this mirror maze that could have given rise to such remains. As I dodged and crawled through the reflective battle zone, I began to get an understanding of the mirrors themselves. Some appeared to be plain old funhouse mirrors, pulling and twisting your reflection into something barely recognizable. Other mirrors were far worse. When you looked in some of them, your reflection appeared exactly the same, but the way you felt about what you saw was warped and distorted. There was this one mirror that made me see myself as weak and cowardly, and another that made me feel so overwhelming and inadequate, I felt I'd shrivel into nothingness if I looked too long. Another mirror made me feel as if I were instantly stupid. Another magnified the fear in my soul so much, I was afraid I might scream and never stop. No mirrors in the real world had the ability to reach inside you the way these did. You could tell yourself that the mirrors were simply telling lies, but you'd be wrong. They took tiny truths, swelling them out of proportion, and the fact that there was a kernel of truth in what they reflected made the effect devastating. Now I realized that all the wails I'd been hearing far off in the maze weren't just from riders falling victim to the Bozo Brigade. They were the wails of riders torn apart by the twisted reflection of their own inner selves. I did my best to keep from looking in any more mirrors, but it was harder than you might think. Once you started looking into these mirrors, it was next to impossible to look away. I guess we all can't help peeking at our own imperfections, just like we can't help scratching a scab that keeps itching. When those imperfections are pasted across your face like that, exaggerated and magnified, it's hard to find all those good thoughts you have about yourself. If you believe those distorted reflections too deeply, you'll never get out of the maze. A mortar shell rocketed my way, and I hit the floor as it shot past, ricocheting deeper into the funhouse. That's when I came face to face with the skull. I yelped in surprise. Like the other bones in this place, it was far from human. It was lopsided and gourd-shaped, with one eye socket the size of a baseball and the other the size of a marble. Its nasal cavity was as twisted as a snail shell, and its jaw was filled with mismatched teeth that would plague a dentist's darkest dreams. Not human. Not even close. There was a thigh bone, too. At least I think it was a thigh bone, in the shape of an S. I tried to imagine the creature that would have bones like this, but it couldn't fit into my imagination. Turned out I didn't have to, because I suddenly heard a sickly, raspy breath behind me. One of those things had found me. I turned to see it lumbering toward me. It was no larger than I was, but its ugliness made it seem immense. To say the thing was hideous did not do it justice. It was an awful mockery of life. Ragged, protruding ears, one higher than the other. Shoulders set in the uneven slouch like a living landslide. And a spine hunched in a roller coaster curve that made my back hurt just looking at it. It had one huge elephant eye, a tiny shrunken one, and its arms were shriveled like the limbs of a T-Rex, ending in a stubby claw-like fingers. Have you ever seen the figures Picasso painted? Well, this thing was like a Picasso from hell. If I had one of those clowns' bazookas, I would have put it out of its misery right then and there. It looped closer, and I took a healthy step back. Back off, Quasimodo. It opened its swollen, crooked mouth and let loose a moan. Then it lunged for me, claws reaching for my throat. I swung the skull at it, hitting it on the shoulder, and ran, making it turn after turn in the narrow corridors of mirrors until I found myself at yet another dead end. I pivoted, thinking the creature was still behind me, but I'd lost it, for now. I was still holding the misshapen skull, a good thing too, because if I had dropped it on the way, I would never have made the connection. Now I happened to look at the mirror in front of me. It was your standard distorting mirror, stretching and descending my image, but the reflection of the skull didn't quite look that way. In fact, the twisted skull, when reflected by the twisted mirror, was the perfect reflection of a human skull. I looked at my lopsided skull again, and back at its perfect reflection. Then I reached out with my free hand and touched the surface of the mirror. My hand passed through the glass as if there was no glass at all. I could see my fingers on the other side of the mirror, and I almost screamed. They were short, stubby claws. I moved my fingers, feeling how my flesh had changed once they'd passed through the looking glass. I pulled my hand back quickly, and my fingers returned to normal, tingling from the change they had undergone when they had passed through. Then I heard a sound behind me and turned to see the creature once more. It was breathing heavily, tears rolling down its stretched face, splashing onto its huge, bulging belly. It didn't chase me, but looped toward me cautiously, and I grimaced. "Does your face hurt?" the old joke goes. "'Cause it's killing me." The creature got closer and looked at me for a long time. Then it looked down at its bloating belly and said in a wet, spray voice, "Do I look fat to you?" My knees buckled. I almost fell through one of the distorting mirrors, but kept enough of my balance to stay on the right side of the glass. "Maggie? Is that you?" And she sadly nodded her lopsided head. "Crashed our bumper car," Maggie said as we crouched at the dead end, listening to the distant wails and explosions echoing the maze. At first, I couldn't understand her speech, filtering through the mess of a mouth. But after a while, it was kind of like listening to Shakespeare. The more I listened, the more I could understand. Crashed our bumper car, but couldn't stop. Had to get another car. Had to ride. Don't know why. Couldn't stop. "It's all right," I told her. "I know what this place does to you. Tell me what happened next." She drew a deep breath and rested for a moment. It was a real chore for her to speak with her tongue so thick and her jaw so misaligned. Found a manhole cover. Ride symbol on it. Knew it was the next ride. Pried it open. Jumped in. Wound up here. Maggie reached up a distorted hand and wiped away a tear from her smaller eye. "Where's Russ?" I asked her. "What happened to him?" She shuddered. I could see that this was the hardest part for her, and I braced myself for the worst. "Running through the mirrors. Both of us. I fell. I fell again through the mirrors. One mirror, then another, then another. Couldn't find the first one. Kept trying. Couldn't find it." Her voice got higher and harder to understand. Now her large one eye began to drip heavy tears. "Russ saw me. He saw me and he didn't help me. He saw me like this and he ran. Couldn't look at me. He ran." After that, her words dissolved into sobs. I reached out and took her in my arms as best I could. "I won't run from you," I told her. "You did," she accused. "You did, you did, you did." "I didn't know it was you." But that didn't stop her tears. "Russ knew," she wailed. "Russ knew and he ran away." "I'm not Russ." Slowly, she began to calm down. Far off, I heard another blast, and booted footsteps resounded through the maze. But I didn't care about all that right now. I knew this was a strange thing to say, but I never felt closer to Maggie than I did at the moment. I found myself leaning forward and kissing those swollen, sagging lips. It was the most repulsive thing I'd ever done. Yet, it was the most wonderful. When I looked at her again, she'd stopped crying. She was still the same mess she'd been a moment before. I mean, it wasn't like the kiss had changed her from a frog into a princess, but something had changed in both of us in that weird little moment. "I'll fix everything," I told her, promised her, swore to her. There was a way out of every ride. Cassandra had said so herself. Not just for me, but for Maggie too. And maybe even for Quinn. "Listen," I told her, "this path was a dead end, but the next one might not be. We'll go together." I took her misshapen hand and held it tight. "I won't let you go." But she was not quite ready to believe me. "I hate myself," she said, not wanting to look at me in the eye. "I always have." And maybe from somewhere deep down, she was telling the truth. I mean, I know I've hated myself from time to time, but the thing is, that feeling comes and it goes. Mostly it goes. But I figured Maggie had fallen through one of the distorting mirrors that took that tiny little feeling and made it so big that it buried everything else under it. Russ was right to run from me. She must have fallen through the feel sorry for yourself mirror too. This situation was getting much too serious. So I looked at her stretched jaw. "Come on, Maggie. Why the long face?" "Ha ha." She hit me on the arm, but I just smiled back. I can't quite say I grew used to the distorted image she'd made of herself, but I'd stretched my own mind enough to accept it. "Stop looking at me," she said, hiding her face. "I'm terrible. I'm so ugly." And then I got an idea. It was either a really great idea or a really bad one. But I was willing to take my chances. I smiled at her. "You can say that again." She looked at me uncertainly. "What?" "You're not just butt ugly," I continued, "but you're not just coyote ugly." You're coyote butt ugly. Shut up. You're so ugly, your driver's license doesn't have a picture. Instead, it just says, you don't want to know. Stop it, she yelled, but now she was laughing. You're so ugly that, but I was fresh out of lame, ugly jokes. So she came up with one. I'm so ugly, my face is registered as a lethal weapon. I laughed, she laughed. Before long, we were both caught up in one of those silly giggle fights where you can't even catch your breath. And it was great because suddenly it didn't matter what she looked like. I could see the gratitude in those mismatched eyes, and they were the same shade of green they'd always been. I could see that little girl I knew. We wound around deeper into the maze, encountering dead end after dead end. I tried to keep track of every turn we took, but it was just too much. Every once in a while, we encountered other mutated riders. Some were furious and waved their arms at us angrily. Others were terrified and ran away. Still others just sat there morosely, like orangutans at the zoo, resigned to their condition. If I could just figure out the combination of mirrors you passed through, I said to Maggie, we could get you back to normal. I tried, she said. I tried too many. I kept turning right, then left, didn't do any good. Each one was worse. And then something occurred to me. None of these mirrors were solid, not a single one, which meant that the mirrors weren't actually holding us in. There were no walls holding us in. I turned to face the mirror beside me. Could it be that easy? Of course it could. What better joke for Cassandra to pull than to make the answer so obvious? You looked right past it? You walked around it, changing direction again and again and again. I looked at my reflection, one shoulder higher than the other, a nasty curved spine. I took a step toward the mirror and Maggie squeezed my hand. No, don't! Trust me, I told her. There was no reason she should. I knew no more than she did, but she took a deep breath and together we stepped forward through the mirror. I felt the change like an electric shock as I merged with my reflection, becoming what I saw. I could feel the distortion inside me, the sickening swelling of organs and the shifting of bones, but I refused to panic. I held tightly to Maggie's hand. I didn't turn around. I didn't turn left or right, getting confused as to which direction I started out in. Instead, I stepped forward, again, into the next mirror. This was a really bad one, altering the way I felt about myself. I'm wrong. I'm always wrong. I can't make a good decision. I felt the mirror turning me uncertain and indecisive, making me feel that no matter what I did next, I was doomed, doomed, doomed. Maggie felt it too. I heard her moaning and trying to loosen her grip on my hand, not trusting me, not trusting herself. If I gave in to those feelings, we truly would be doomed. So I fought my own mind and made my feet move, stepping forward again to the next mirror, and the next, and the next, always moving forward. My stride became a limping lope. My eyesight turned cloudy and full of double images as my eyes changed sizes. Through it all, Maggie held my hand. The times when I came to mirrors that slowed me down because of what they made me feel, that was when she took the lead, pulling me on, even when I didn't have the strength to move forward. There came a point when my body had become so unnaturally bent and convoluted that moving forward was next to impossible. One foot dragged, the other moved sideways. My whole body ached and strained against itself as if, at any moment, my joints would give way and I would collapse into a blubbery mess on the bone-ridden ground. My own frame looked as bad as these bones did, and I wondered whether they were actually the bones of other unfortunate riders or whether they were just put there to force everyone trapped into the maze to give up hope. We must have passed through the 20 mirrors. I began to worry about maybe my theory was wrong. I stumbled and Maggie helped me up. I felt my face and turned to her. She didn't look much worse than she had when I first found her. And then she couldn't look much worse than she already had. Now we're the same, I told her. My voice was so distorted I could barely make out my own words. She touched my face, which was numb and rubbery. We always were, she said. Do you know what it's like to be turned inside out in every way you can be and have the worst parts of yourself exposed to everyone who happens to be looking? Maybe you do, after all. It happens to us a little bit all the time. I guess lots of people would look at you and run, like Russ. But to have someone who won't run, someone who won't use your shame against you, that takes someone special. Having that person with you and the worst part of the maze makes all the difference. I honestly don't know if I could have made it any farther on my own, but Maggie was there and it was all right. We were the same. I took her hand again and kept going. If moving through the mirrors was a mistake, I didn't care. I was going all the way until there was nothing left of me. We pushed through 5 more mirrors, 10, 20. Then finally the reflection started to get just a little bit better. The feelings I had inside began to lighten just the slightest bit. A few mirrors more, and my eyes went back to normal. The twist in my spine was almost gone, and my arms were just about the same length. I was almost myself, and when I looked at Maggie, she was almost herself too. Finally, we stood at the last mirror. I knew it was the last mirror because the reflection it gave back was perfect. Well, maybe not perfect, but me, and all my imperfections. As I stood there, I felt the urge to look everywhere but straight ahead, as if the mirrors on either side of me were daring me to take a final glance. I resisted. I forced myself to take that giant step through the last mirror to find myself facing a pea green sky and an endless salt flat. We made it! I shouted, we're out! But somewhere along the way, as we were passing through those last few mirrors, I'd let go of Maggie's hand. When I looked beside me, Maggie wasn't there. I turned around and saw her standing just on the other side of the final mirror. It was one way. She couldn't see me, but I could see her. Maggie, come on, step through! She couldn't hear me either, so I reached out and bumped against glass. From my side, the mirror was solid. Blake? She called. Blake, where are you? Maggie! I screamed, and I pounded on the glass, but she couldn't see. She couldn't hear. Blake! And then she turned. I don't know what she saw in the mirror beside her, but whatever it was, it must have been horrible. It must have been the worst of all because it undid her. She put her hand over her mouth and let loose a wail so full of despair it could blacken the sun. Turn around, I yelled at her. Look forward. Just one more step. Just one more. But she couldn't hear me. I pounded on the glass again and again, but nothing helped. She was locked on whatever she was seeing. She stumbled back and fell through another mirror. I watched, powerless, as she looked around, trying to remember from which way she had come. She was sobbing now. Sorrow, fear, all her worst emotions were amplified, stretching her face again as she stumbled in one direction and then another and another. Maggie! I kept my eyes locked on her, pounding on the glass, as she ran in panic in every direction, passing through mirror after mirror, becoming more and more distorted and disoriented, her screams changing until they weren't even human. Then she was gone, so lost in the maze that I couldn't see her anymore. No! I beat the glass again with all my might. I wanted the glass to shatter. I wanted the whole cathedral to explode, but the glass held. I slid to the ground, and for the first time since arriving in this terrible place, I cried. I bawled like a baby. It was all my fault. I'd let her go. I'd stepped out before she had, and now she was lost and alone. I'd left her. Despite all my promises, I'd left her. Suddenly I felt the way I did all those years ago, when I had pounded against the emergency exit door at the back of the bus, unable to open it. To be completely helpless in the face of life, powerless to do a single thing. That's what I'd always feared more than anything. It was like I'd been keeping all the edges of my life neat and clean, pretending the neatness was all that mattered, pretending life could somehow be controlled. For a moment, I felt like giving up. I closed my eyes. No, I would not give in. If it were my fate to keep smashing my fist against emergency exit doors, then that's what I would do. Even if I saved no one, even if I died doing it, this place would not beat me. I opened my eyes. There before me on the barren salt plain was a turnstile in front of a freestanding stone arch. My failure to bring Maggie out of the maze weighed on me like an anchor, and I buried my feelings of loss, of inadequacy, of failure. Those mirrors were behind me now. My path was forward. It had to be. 4 rides down. I was more than halfway to 7. I put one foot in front of the other, forcing myself to move on, refusing to look back. As I walked away from the distortions of the mirror cathedral, the symbol of the back on my hand glowed, blinding white, and for the first time, I felt excitement instead of just dread. I was not going to be a victim. I was a challenger, just as Cassandra had said. I was going to be the best challenger this place had ever known. I ran my hand over the scanner and pushed through the turnstile. I was no longer on the salt flat, but was winding through an empty line toward the ride ahead. I heard the ride before I saw it, an awful metallic click, click, click of a chain. I knew that sound. Oh, did I know that sound? The next ride was a roller coaster, and it was called the Kamikaze.